Greetings from the Long Island Sound podcast. Welcome to the show. Please rate, review, and comment on the show, and call our listener line and leave a message for our guest. Dial 631-800-3579. All right, enjoy the show. Welcome to the Long Island Sound podcast, where we explore the muse and music from the North Shore to the South Shore, from New York City to the Hamptons, on the island of Long here in New York. I'm Steve Yusko from gigdestiny.com. Stay tuned as we explore the Long Island Sound. Welcome to the Long Island Sound podcast. I'm your host, Steve Yusko from Gig Destiny, and I am excited about the guest that we have today. I had a great conversation with Steve Martino, who hails from Babylon Village. I met Steve a number of years ago when our local Catholic church experimented by interjecting contemporary Christian music into the Sunday Mass service. Ooh, very controversial. Ran into a few obstacles, but in the end, we had a joyous, collaborative group led by Steve Martino. Steve has a lot to offer. We're going to talk about his music, his interests, his favorite artists. Stick with us. Hi, this is Steve Yusko from gigdestiny.com. You're listening to the Long Island Sound podcast, and I'm so happy to be with a good friend of mine today, Steve Martino from Babylon Village. I met Steve several years ago when we started a contemporary Christian band in a Catholic church, and woo, was it controversial. We had a great time. We had a few obstacles to overcome, but I tell you, it was a real joy, and I learned a lot from Steve. He took this knucklehead strumming guitarist, lousy singer, and actually worked with me. And despite that, I remained in the band. So anyway, I want to welcome Steve Martino. Welcome to the podcast, Steve. Good to have you.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm humbled to be a part of this, and I'm really excited at the same time. I will say that I agree with you about the enjoyment we got meeting each other and working together in that contemporary music ensemble. And it was a learning experience for me as well. I just enjoyed working with everybody, and everybody brought something to the table. So it was good.
You know what I really like is the fact that you said you're humbled. So that's a great way to start the podcast, when you're humbled and I'm in charge. So, all right, so we got that right off the bat. So let's jump right into it. So, Steve, did you come from a musical family? Like, what really gave you the urge to say, "Hey, I want to play music"?
You know, I did not come from a musical family in that my parents did not play instruments. My mother's uncle and father were very musical, and they played the piano and sang in choruses, but there wasn't any of that growing up. So, but I will say that I came from a artistic background in that my dad was an art teacher. He was an artist and an art teacher. And so there was always a sense of exploration and learning and that kind of thing. How I gravitated towards music, I really don't know. I just always enjoyed, it was funny, keeping time. And I would start to get into playing drums, which originally starts as a small kid. You're banging on anything you can get your hands on.
Right.
I do remember vividly asking for my first drum set. And this is after I saw things like the Beatles on TV and things like that, and I became aware of it. And of course, the first drum set my parents got me was a toy drum set. I come running down the stairs expecting to see the Black Oyster Pearl Ludwig, Ringo set, and not that I was disappointed, but it was like they were doing the right thing. Like, see if he's really interested, see if there is if this is just a fad. And then it just gravitated from there, and I just naturally gravitated towards playing the drums, and I couldn't say that there was any defining moment. I just always sort of had it like in the back of me, if you will.
So how old were you when you got that set? Do you remember?
Oh, gosh. It was, we still lived in Farmingdale. I was probably, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years old.
So both of us as parents, I give a lot of credit to your parents. I don't know if I'd ever hand a drum set to any of my kids, but the fact that you came from a fertile ground as far as that exploration really kind of sets you on a really good footing. And that's, of the musicians that I've been blessed to talk to, it's that keen sense of spirit to explore and expand and learn and grow from that makes beautiful music here on Long Island. So you get this drum set. All right. So what was your next drum set? Did you,
so the next drum set, I think once they realized I was serious, that I had to take music lessons in school. There was a point at which I think in third grade, everybody had to sign up to take an instrument as part of the curriculum. I chose drums. So the first thing I got, of course, was a practice pad and 2 sticks. And it went from that. And I did all my rudiments, and I practiced learning all the elements that I had to learn to play the drums in a band or orchestral or symphonic band setting that you had in grade school. And I think they could see that I was getting serious and good at it. And so I think around my 11th, I think I was 11 years old, for Christmas, I got a Ludwig snare drum.
Wow.
And that was it. But it was a Ludwig snare drum on a stand, and I had my sticks. Well, I played that snare drum like it was an entire drum set. And I remember, and you talk about parents, right? This is where their patience came in. I took that snare drum upstairs. We lived in Babylon Village, big old Victorian or colonial home. I'm not quite sure what it's classified as. Went up into the closet in a room I shared with my brother, set it up, and sat there and probably played it for the duration of Christmas Day.
Wow.
And at one point, I remember saying to myself, is this too early? I mean, I was 11. I was like, oh, this might be a little early.
Right.
But I didn't stop, and my parents didn't stop me. So I guess it was okay. And I just sat there, and I imagined myself behind a full set of drums. And I just played like a ride beat in my right hand and a back beat with my left hand. And I just sat there. And to me, it was like an entire set of drums. And then I pieced it together. The next gift I got was a hi-hat. And I distinctly remember the first set that I got. It wasn't a very professional set. It was called Stewart drums. It was probably like a B-level set of drums, but they were real drums. They were like drums, bass drum with a pedal and tom-toms. And I think it was my birthday. I remember sitting downstairs. It's just a vivid memory. And my dad walking in the room doing his usual, oh man, I really wish I had a, piece of paper to draw on or something. And like, what's he talking about? I'm watching TV. He's just walking around looking for stuff. And then finally he says, hey, don't you have homework to do? I'm like, oh yeah, because he shuts the TV off. I go running upstairs, and I stopped in my tracks. Right there in the bedroom was the set of drums already set up. And
wow.
Oh my God, I literally sat there. I was like, almost like breathless. It was blue sparkle, Stewart drums made somewhere in England. And that's another one. I remember I must have stood, it feels like I stood there for 15 minutes, just like aghast, trying to catch my breath. It was so, such a moment for me. And then I just remember going downstairs, thanking him. And then again, went upstairs, put the snare drum with it, the hi-hat that I had gotten, and then I played. I don't know how I didn't get thrown out of the house, because at that point, again, I had a hi-hat, a snare drum, bass drum with a foot pedal, so that was huge, and a single tom-tom. And I played those drums till, I don't know how I didn't get thrown out of the neighborhood, let alone my house. But
what I find so interesting about that, and not to psychoanalyze you, but the encouragement and the spoon feeding. One thing you can't create in people is desire. So mom and dad recognized the desire in you, and obviously talent. Okay, you could keep time, and they introduce. I mean, it sounded like an epiphany. It's like
it was
that brand new car. And you know what?
Yeah.
I guess the extra thing is wow, they really see something in me, and then you get encouraged along. And you did the same thing, by the way. You did the same thing with me in the contemporary Christian group, in that nowhere did I have the chops to do it, but you were very encouraging, and that means so much. And I remember one statement that you made, and we were talking about different levels of talent within the group, I think after practice, and you said, if I have a diva who's got a lot of talent, and I have somebody who's got the desire and the energy, give me that person, and I can work with them, and we can make something of it.
And I still believe that. I still believe that. I mean, there are people that are always the most amazing musicians ever, and even myself, I don't feel like I am. You know, I watch piano players and drummers that are out there that are just, even my son. My son is just so much a better drummer than I am. And I see that, and I'm like, man, I wish I could play like that. But when they come at you with that, hey, I'm the best. I haven't even got time for you. You can't do anything with them. Right. So I'd rather take somebody that's really wants to learn how to do it, and how can I make them show me something. And sometimes I don't even have the answer, but it's like, let's try to figure something out. I love that, and that I actually think you get a better result if that makes sense.
Sure. Hey, we're going to take a short break now. When we come back, you touched on the Beatles, which seems to be a common denominator, maybe for people in our age group. But I want to explore some of your influences, because that's what kind of shaped you into the musician and the teacher. I consider you a teacher that you are today. So we're going to take a quick break, and you're listening to the Long Island Sound Podcast. Stick with us. Are you a singer-songwriter who wants to take your music to the next level, and you need some professional musicians and really that expertise to help you along? Well, check out Melts in Your Ears Studio. It's Mike Nugent's studio. If you like what you've heard here today, Mike's the guy who can make the connections, put the tracks together, and give you a quality product. Check it out. Welcome back, everybody. We're here with Steve Martino. You're at the Long Island Sound. Steve is a local resident, or was a local resident in Babylon Village, a good neighbor of mine. And Steve, I want to go into the well of inspiration. We talked about how you're inspired really by your parents, who were not musical, but Dad was artistic and recognized the talent in you. And I think more than anything else, you had drive to woodshed your instrument. And what I mean by woodshed is you paid the price to hone your talent. But let's talk about your other influences that led you through high school and then into college. What kind of music did you listen to? Who were your favorite artists, that sort of thing?
Wow. Appreciate it. Yeah. So I would say, of course, like most of us from our generation, the first time you noticed live music or the impact of music was the Beatles. And that it led me immediately to not just the Beatles, who were fantastic, but to everybody else, the Rolling Stones, the Grassroots, Ike and Tina Turner, all of those bands, Creedence Clearwater, as obviously as time went on. So, one thing that I do remember, just going back to my parents at night, going to bed, they would always play, back when you had a hi-fi, if you remember a hi-fi, right?
For the kids in the audience, a hi-fi is a high fidelity stereo unit. It usually included a television and a turntable that they had this thing plastic called vinyl and records, and we would play music.
And they were the size of a small coffin almost. But right. But sure. And my dad would play records to put us to sleep. So. And here's what was interesting. He would put on records like the soundtrack to Mary Poppins. The next night he would put on a classical music. And then the next night he would put on the Rolling Stones album Flowers.
Really?
And so, yeah. And then Sgt. Pepper comes out and he's playing Sgt. Pepper. And these are all, so I sat sort of immersed in this stuff and I was listening to it. And I started to notice all these bands, and wanted to play like them and play drums like them. But as I evolved, I do remember one point my dad got me through one of his colleagues at school a copy of Buddy Rich's Greatest Hits as a drummer, big band. Mm-hmm. I put that album on with headphones, again, wired in headphones to that stereo, and I would just sit there and listen to it. And it would end, I'd flip it over, play the other side, stop, flip it back over, and play it, and just was engrossed in the way Buddy Rich played the drums, where he made the drums, in my opinion, and there's millions of opinions, but he made the drums not just an element in the band, but a featured element of the band. It was as musical as it was the guy playing the trumpet or the bass guitar. It actually had a musical element to it.
Right. So he was more than the metronome, and
right.
If you think about the late Neil Peart,
right,
same thing, same aspect. He took it in a different direction, and yet the late Charlie Watts was just the opposite. When they asked him what his job was, and he said, "Keep time."
But I honestly think, and it was Nigel Olsson said a very similar thing, and he was the drummer for Spencer Davis and Elton John, and he said the same thing. He didn't want to become a great soloist. He wanted to be a great timekeeper. But I look at it a little bit differently. That is the musical element that you're bringing to the song. I mean, think of a Rolling Stones song played by anybody else but Charlie Watts. And it's like, oh, it's going to sound different. It's going to be different, even if they try to emulate him. So I started to look at it that way. I started to feel like, I want to learn how to perfect this so that you don't overplay, you don't underplay. When you're called on, you can do what so you had to have chops. That was the practicing part of it. But that led me to just sort of like, now I'm starting to listen to, oh my goodness. Of course, then in 1977, Asia comes out by Steely Dan. And just the recording, the drummers on that, Bernard Purdie and the Purdie Shuffle, which is in Josie. And then, of course, Steve Gadd's playing in the song, the title track, Asia. That just like lit the world up. And from drummer's perspective, as well as, Steely Dan was so creative and so different. They took rock music, if you wanted to call it that, in a whole new direction, little jazz elements to it. And they opened up my ears, and then I started, and of course, listening to big bands. And then I started to just get engrossed in lyricists and listening to Simon and Garfunkel. And there's as simple as their song, as what people could say, oh, it's a simple song. It's, 4 chords and, it's nothing fancy. Well, yeah, but maybe that's exactly what that song needed. And it's the lyrics that were just they got you so engrossed. And so I started, who are my influences? Man, I honestly wish I could put them down on paper and say, here they are. But I think it's so many.
What I find interesting is and going back to your dad and mom in playing all these different genres to help you go to sleep. Maybe they kept you up at night and didn't put you to sleep. But I think it sets the platform for you to explore and not lock yourself into one particular genre. And that's not to disparage musicians who are classified, I would say. I mean, even Charlie Watts. I remember my father-in-law had this Charlie Watts album. That was a jazz album.
Oh, yeah.
And it was phenomenal. It was just really, because, at least at that time, Charlie Watts would think, okay, it's rock and roll, and man, it's a different direction. So I think you only grow by being open to that. Let me ask you this question. What was the first concert you went to?
Oh, wow. Holy mackerel. That's a good one.
This is where we do the musical interlude while Steve picks his brain.
Yeah, this might take a while. I hope we have a long piece. I do remember distinctly a couple of concerts. I don't know if they were, which one came first. I do remember.
This was the 70s, and even though we had 70s. A lot of great times, we don't remember them. So. So I do remember I went to America at Nassau Coliseum. Oh, okay.
A bunch of high school friends, we all got together. We wound up going to the America concert. And of course, they had A Horse with No Name and a few songs that we were all familiar with, and Ventura Highway. And Sister Golden Hair was one of my absolute favorite songs. So we go to this concert, and I'm expecting, again, your preconceived, they're going to be sitting on stools, strumming their guitars, singing these nice lyrics. They rocked the heck out of Nassau Coliseum. I mean, it just exploded. And I was taken, almost surprised by it. I didn't expect them to be that hard edged or have that edge to them.
Right.
Then I remember going to see Queen.
Wow.
Queen. And again, just blown away with the intricacies of what they did and of course the theatricality of the whole thing. Remember seeing Elton John in the I guess it was, I honestly don't remember them now into the 80s or not, but
was it the old Brick Road?
It was, no, it was after that. It was,
Okay.
oh gosh, maybe it was, I forget the sequence of his albums. It might have been Caribou
Hmm.
and a few others after that. But I remember how electrified the place became to the point that at the end of it, it was like a big hug fest. Everybody was dancing with everybody. I mean, there were policemen in the aisles that were there to obviously serve as crowd control and everything. This is Madison Square Garden, and they're dancing with other patrons that came to the
How
concert.
nice.
Because he just had the place in the palm of his hand. And I remember thinking, how cool is that? What a feeling that is when everything fires on all cylinders,
Right.
and the whole ambiance comes together and the band is cooking and the music is great.
Yeah,
I just,
it's kind of magical, and it's really transformative. I don't think there's anything else in the world that can produce these unexpected circumstances,
well,
especially live performances.
and again, but that same feeling, we go back to the group that you and I were in the contemporary music ensemble. There were moments that we'd be doing our thing, and it would just, even not even necessarily recognize at that moment, but I would just sit here and be like, "Oh, did you hear that?
Right.
That was just perfect."
Right.
And it might have been a 2-second spot in a song, but everybody just got it just right. That is one of the most rewarding feelings in the world.
Yeah.
And when that happens, I'm just enthralled with it.
Yeah. I at that time I happened to be into video. I had this little Sony camera, and kind of like as I was learning and continue to learn, the guy who videotapes his golf swing to make his golf swing better. We recorded every practice and every mass that we did, and we learned from it too. And then now we have some of it was lost, unfortunately, due to my hard drive crashing, but I saved a lot of it. And talking about live performances, I remember just for myself, in the reciprocal thought of what you saw at your America concert, I love Jackson Browne, and we went to see him on the Running on Empty tour, and he could, at that point, in my opinion, he couldn't entertain himself out of a paper bag. He just did his album, and that was it.
Yeah.
I was like, shit, I could have listened to that at home.
I know.
And not spent $10 on a lousy T-shirt.
Yeah.
So there is, I think there is that, and I think we all recognize it. There are people with great musical talent that are not good entertainers. They're good with music, but they don't connect with the crowd. There are mediocre musicians who connect with the crowd and have a great time, and it's magical through all the clubs and everything else. So it's really
It is. It's so true. It's again, that comes back to the diva in the group. You have to be that good, and you still may give a lousy performance, or you may not connect.
Right.
And as opposed to the person just goes up is so happy to be there and just enjoying what they do, and it just comes across, and it sounds great. And I sometimes don't even realize they know that it sounded that great.
All right, let's go back to. Sorry, I cut you off.
No.
Let's go back to. All right, you get your drums. You're in high school. Okay. You studied music in college. Like, were you in band? Where did you practice your art through high school and move on from there?
So I did go to school for music, and this is again another influence of my parents. I really at the time was thinking I wanted to go to the Berklee School of Music up in Boston and learn to be a jazz musician, big band player, that kind of thing, studio musician.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my dad's influence, and part of this was, I look back, I'm not quite sure what he was thinking, but he was, Berklee at the time was not an accredited institution. So the diploma coming out of it, although from my mind, I'm like, well, what do you need a diploma to get a job in a recording studio?
Right.
Well, so I think he was approaching it from the parental side, saying, oh, you need to get a degree.
You need that sheepskin, right?
Right, exactly. So I wound up going to Stony Brook University, but the musical staff at Stony Brook were top-notch. Bernard Greenbaum from Beaux-Arts Trio playing cello, and oh gosh, I'm going to forget all the names. And I studied with a drummer, a percussion instructor by the name of Ray DeRoche. and he was in the New Jersey percussion ensemble, and he was a founding member of what was essentially, people would call it avant-garde music. It's technically termed contemporary music, but not like contemporary like we think of it, like what we were doing with the church group. It was more, I'll just say avant-garde, but it was percussion as musical instruments. The entire ensemble was a bunch of percussionists. So how does that sound? People go to there and like, well, where's the flute player? There isn't, but we got marimbas, glockenspiels, and vibraphones, and drums, and all kinds of elemental percussive instruments, even to the point I played on a set of brake drums, if you can believe that, but they had their own sound. And so I started to learn to just like open my head. And again, I go back to my dad in the sense that he was probably pushing me towards the accredited degree, but I wound up benefiting from just a totally different musical experience. But so I did that. I played in these percussion ensembles, and I'll call it avant-garde to give somebody sort of a reference point. But what was during that time, I kept my drum set at school, and I would set it up at night. After rehearsals, after school, I'd set it up in the little practice rooms, and I'd sit there and play for a few hours, and then pack it back up. And I started to play in a little jazz trio with a guitarist who was also a music major at Stony Brook. He was studying composition, but he was a terrific jazz guitar player, upright bass and flute. And that was the jazz combo. And we would go out and we would play at Dex, which was a place up in like Sound Beach or Rocky Point, if you will. Country Corner, which you're familiar with. Right, sure. We would play these places, and it was so, I don't even know if I can say his name, right? The guitarist, he's got his own website and everything. So his name was John Klopotowski. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, let's plug John, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't spoken to him since I got out of college. But I don't think he recognizes, or I don't think he knows how much he influenced me, because we would sit in rehearsing, and I'm playing in this jazz trio, and he'd be like, you're not following. Listen to the solo. You got to work with the soloist. You got to go where he's going. See if you can, anticipate, listen, use your ear. Don't just be sitting there keeping time. Use your ear. Where's he going? Where's the solo going? And work with him. And I remember I was like, man, this is hard. And I'm listening. And he never kicked me out. He never threw me out of the group. And I remember after one gig, he played this solo and he was going along. And we went up when he went up and down. We worked together. It was just a musical communication. And at the end of it, he looked at me and goes, that was cool. And I was like, oh, I've arrived, right? There's 4 people in the audience. 3 of them are sleeping, but it was just, that sense of, bottom line, I feel like I learned all kinds of things from all kinds of people. I learned from Ray DeRoche. It was cool.
It's interesting, and you spoke about this earlier offline about, communication between musicians. I find it just, sometimes they don't even have to think. You've been together so long, you kind of know where somebody's going to go. I remember, my guitar teacher, Mike Nugent, I talk about all the time because he's just phenomenal. I remember, he was playing in the Penny Pub in Bayshore, and I asked for a Dave Mason tune, and I spoke about this before, and boom, just pulled it out of his back pocket. Him and Jim Small played it, and then he went in a direction that I never heard before, and it was just kind of magical. The place didn't have a lot of people in it, but for me, it was cool. It was a really great thing to experience, that communication. And sometimes the audience can see that, sometimes they don't, but it's there, it certainly is.
So and that's happened to me several times. And again, this comes down to your influences. And of course, you can always name all the big stars that we all grew up with listening to. And those are certainly influences, but I've also been influenced by people at what I would call the local level, if you will. And sometimes I don't know whether they realize the impact they're having. I played in a local band, and all the guys still live on Long Island. And the bass player in that band became a school teacher. I'm going to forget where he taught school, but out east. And he went to Ithaca. And the first time I met him is when we were preparing to take a tour of Mexico, and he was friends with the other guys in the band. And we started to gel as a drummer and bass player. Mm-hmm. So tight. And we have some recordings out. They're on cassette. I'd have to find them. I couldn't even tell you where they are, but and we played this song, big, long, dramatic, progressive rock song written by the keyboard player.
Okay.
And there was one moment we're recording it. It goes to the solo section, and it was the typical groove. And when you say, without even thinking about it, we got to the next change, mm-hmm. and he and I, my bass drum foot and his bass line synced up like that. That while we were recording, we both just looked at each other, and it was like, damn, you can't. He didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to him. We just both instinctively went, he's going to lay down this. And he was a tremendous bass player. And he's retired now and still on Long Island. He's in mm-hmm. Vanderbilt. Mike Cisano is his name. He's one of the most, and he's also a great composer. And
we got to get him to be a guest on the Long Island.
He would be. I think so. He writes brass charts for bands that need him and stuff like that. He's very, very talented, and he also would write. But some of the stuff he would write would be like, "Well, this is really kind of going outside the box," kind of interesting stuff. But again, influenced me to think like, "Oh, it's not just every 4 bars is another change. You change from 1 chord to 4 chord, back to the 5, back to 1." Just kind of broke open, like, think about it differently. And,
I tell you, speaking to musicians like you and other people, I've sat with them, and you guys have very tuned ears that are, mine is obviously tuned very differently. As you pointed out. I know, it's self-deprecating. But what's interesting is when you sit with musicians and you're listening, or they're listening to their song or a song that they love, and they'll stop and listen to this part. This is what happened here.
Yeah.
And it's I call it an educated ear. And it's almost like somebody, I always equate music to food. It's like somebody saying, oh, look, taste that appetizer. Taste that in your ear, because you'll really experience something different. And that's what I think the cool thing is. And I think also in the short time that we've had the Long Island Sound podcast going is, man, what a fertile field this island is for musicians and the unsung. This is a bad pun. The unsung talent that is there that helped develop all these different genres. They're playing the pubs and the restaurants and the weddings and what have you. It's just, I think if there's any goal that I have is one, to have fun and to learn a lot, which I am, and to give exposure to these great talents, and there's something in the water here on Long Island.
Couldn't be said better. I remember this when you talk about memories from way back when I was probably a junior in high school, or what they call the advisor sent us out to go learn about something in the field we want to study. So mm-hmm. I got to go into New York City to go to A&R recording studios. They set up, so I got to go meet Mitch Platkin was the guy, and I remember him distinctly. And he gives us a tour of the studio and microphones and rooms, and we're in there clapping our hands to see how the sound all really cool stuff. I probably didn't appreciate it much at that age because I was just sort of like overwhelmed by it all. But I remember one thing he said. He said, this industry, meaning music, is not necessarily filled with the most talented people. There is a ton of talent that is out there that are better than some of the people that have recording contracts. I think what he was talking about was, as you're alluding to, there is a wealth of talent that doesn't get to be recognized as the big stars, if you will, but there's just incredible talent, people that are so talented and so musical and so capable, great writers, great lyricists, great instrumentalists. And I think you said it absolutely right. Long Island is full of them.
I was amazed at, because of the change in how music is produced and delivered. And there are some good and some really negative aspects, in my opinion. Everyone, it's just like everyone has a print shop in their home with their printer. You have the ability to have a home studio and produce some really interesting stuff. as well as with the internet. You see these videos where you'll have Ringo Starr play a particular song around the world with all these international musicians, and that just kind of gives a picture of what can be done with musicians who live out, aren't able to come to the garage and play together, so to speak. So I think that
Right.
that's great. But there's also, there was big controversy with Spotify and another podcaster, and I'm fully behind Neil Young and what they're saying. But what's interesting, and I was talking to Robert Miller, and he spoke about, this is another guy from New York City. Went out in his 60s and banged out like 7 albums. It was just kind of a miracle. But he said, with these different platforms, the artist is getting 0.004 cents per stream, and you're just thrown into the stew of everybody else that's out there. And that's why I like podcasts. I think this is a way that we can take someone's music and deconstruct it a bit and listen to it and kind of pull the curtain away from the artist and say, gee, what motivated, how'd you come about that? And we all kind of learn from that. So
right. Oh, I think it's great, and I'm thankful that you're doing it. I'm excited for you.
All right, so let's talk, because there's an old story. You're a musician, you're in college, you have high hopes of going in a particular direction, and then things change. As they say, life gets in the way. If you're open to speaking about it, where did things change for you, moving from a musician in college to getting a real job, as they say?
Well, that's literally how it came about. I was working in Port Jeff in a little tourist shop, and that's actually where I met my wife. And but we were playing in that band. I mentioned Mike Gisano. He was the bass player in the band, and guitarist was a phenomenal guitarist. And ultimately, we were playing gigs. We were doing as many as we can. Eric, the guitarist, is a great composer, a terrific writer. He's got a couple albums out with his band, and I'll mention it here, Yellowfly.
Yeah, we'll have a link. We'll have a link to all these guys, by the way, in the chapter comments.
Yeah, he's a terrific writer, and the band was doing well and getting just this close. You gain a little bit of interest and a couple of producers and managers and things like that. Just never went over the top. Eventually, to the point that Eric was like, I gotta go do something. I'm getting these offers, and I don't want to say it was all him. It wasn't. That's not appropriate to say, and I don't mean to single it out. We were obviously going in different directions. I was like, well, I gotta get a job. I mean, I'm working in a tourist shop, if you will, and so what happened was I wound up working for my uncle's company. I do remember distinctly thinking, this is gonna not be great because it's going to steal time away from trying to pursue music. But then I had to almost come to the recognition, maybe I'm not steeled up enough to go after it with all of the fortitude, recognizing that, hey, you might be sleeping in a van.
Down by the river.
Down by the river. I just read Dave Grohl's book, Storyteller, and he's such a fascinating guy, and his life, where his mother, with being a school teacher, actually even let him quit school because she recognized that his desire was to play music, and he did sleep in a van. And when I read that, I'm like, wow, he's 21 years old, he's in Belgium, and he's sleeping in the back of a car, and they're playing a gig and falling asleep backstage and things like that. And it just, the fortitude, you recognize that, wow, that's desire and bravery. And
right.
So I had to even say to myself, man, I don't think I could have done that. I certainly couldn't do it now. But
I don't know. I'll talk to Anne Marie, but she might welcome it.
Well, she might think it's a great idea.
Find you a van right now.
Yeah, I know. But one thing, so what you were mentioning about the good side and the bad side, what I am encouraged about with the way music is now, formerly you had to get that contract, you had to get the recording to get your music out there, which meant grinding it out and hoping somebody would see you, or there'd be enough buzz that it would cause them to come look for you. It was so populated with so many talented bands. How are you going to rise to get recognized? But now you can produce the stuff at home and you can get it out there. So for those that want to do it to make an absolute living, that's the difficulty of Spotify and getting paid so little. But for those that are like, I include myself at this point, like I just want to get what I'm writing out there for people to hear. And I was generally fearful of that. And my early attempts at writing were not very good. And you could ask Mike Gisano about that, and even Eric.
Well, you forgot you were the drummer, for God's sakes.
Well, yeah, but I
gave you a pen and pencil.
Well, it was yeah, right. It was
the old joke. You know, what did the drummers say before they fired him from the band? Hey, I wrote a few songs, guys.
Right, exactly. So that was me, and they were. You know, I look back on them now with all the humility in the world. I'm like, yeah, that was pretty weak, but I still kept at it, kept trying, all right, let me try this and learn this. And I'd listen to other songs and, let me see how they did that. And I try to just work them out. So I feel like I've grown, and now's an opportunity that eventually maybe something I could put gets out there. And I want to do it more for my own validation at this point than to say I'm going to make a living at it.
Right, exactly. That's it's really interesting and I've talked to guys who in a similar boat. They rely a lot on their art, and some of the older guys almost look at it as if we're going to promote you and really talk it up, well, that's kind of being really boastful. But sometimes, and there are a lot of kooky guys out there that are promoters that have broken the trust of a lot of musicians, but you need somebody else to speak for you sometimes and make the right connections and kind of wood shop the connections and the exposure and the radio stations and so on and so forth. I think that's key. We're going to take a break, if you don't mind, Steve. Hang with us. This is Steve Yusko from GigDestiny.com. We're the bridge between musicians and live venues. Come check us out. We're here to help you. Be well. Hey, we're back. Welcome, everybody. This is Steve Yusko from GigDestiny.com. I'm with my good friend, Steve Martino. And Steve, I want to dive into that contemporary music group, which I'll call was an experiment in a Catholic church to bring in contemporary music to the mass. And so why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, that was a great opportunity. It's another one of those opportunities that sort of comes at you somewhat unexpectedly. I do remember we were at the Babylon. I think it might have been actually the pool party that they would throw every year. And we were at the pool party, and one of the deacons at the time came over to me and said, hey, I think, Father Chris at the time, he may want to ask you something about playing in church. I was like, well, man, I don't know if I'm the person for that, but sure. Right. And he did. And he was always very musical himself. Father Chris always had a musical background, and he loved to sing. And in any case, he had the idea of kind of, I don't know, what would you call it? Just sort of, I don't want to say shaking the tree, but finding another way to connect with.
I think that, let's be honest, it was the dwindling attendance. You're losing a certain segment of the population. The 30-ish, the 18 to 30 crowd didn't go to church. And they saw this as a vehicle to make it attractive. What was interesting to me, I got the same tap on the shoulder by Deacon Barry. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And we all have this doubt about ourselves. And it was rocky in the beginning. And it's finding the right people to connect, and that sometimes takes a bit of time. I think there was a excitement by the members to make this very collaborative, which it can be great, but also can be dangerous when you don't have anybody lead it. The collaboration can go off the rails, and you stepped up. There had to be a leader, although there was a lot of shared responsibilities. I remember Rob Bello, great guy, great drummer, phenomenal vocal ear to things. Right. And we were blessed with a mother-daughter team, Barbara and Venetia Kameth, and Rebecca Ryan and a few others in there. Anyway, I'm kind of yapping away, but
No, it's so right. It was, yeah, when you say doubts, you're like, I don't know how, number one, how's it going to be received overall? But Father Chris was very, oh, stick with it. We're going to do this. Let's do it. And we did. And it was rocky, like you say, finding that gelling among the personnel. But what I thought was the most rewarding of all of that was that collaborative element. I mean, we all didn't always have the right answer, and we all expressed our opinions. There were times that it was like, well, no, I think we're going to do it this way.
right.
And it kind of came to that. But what was really fun about all of that was, let's add this element. And I'm like, I don't know if we can do that. Well, let's try it and see. And I think that song that you're going to reference is one of them. We're like, I don't know if we can sing this with all of this harmony. And what are we going to put behind it? And it was almost like, well, the more we pared it down to just the voices and the guitar, it just got better and better. And I don't even think the ladies sing. I shouldn't say that. I'm sure they understand how good it was, but what they did is just absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful rendition.
The other challenges you face is the forces that look at contemporary music as not liturgical, not worship worthy.
Right.
Put it kindly. So we ran into those challenges, and we had guardrails to follow. But we also introduced some popular music as a prelude to the Mass, which was interesting. Bob Dylan's "Make You Feel My Love" came to mind. So we were able to introduce some popular music as preludes to the Mass because we were in those guidelines, but we were able to give kind of the scriptural importance behind the song before it went out there, so no one would mistake that, hey, they're doing Adele.
Right.
At it. But I tell you that the feedback we got from the congregation, and these are just personal friends of mine that came back for a moment until things ended, but it was, it gave them a new perspective on, showing your love for God through music,
Right. And it was very, we became, I think, a well-attended Mass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I think
it was the most highly attended Mass
right.
at the time.
It was. So the goal, I think, Father Chris's goal of reaching out and bringing people, giving them something that they could feel a part of, worked. And it worked really, really well. And, so that part of it worked extremely well, and we were able to do, as you said, some popular music and just give different perspective, because sometimes where are these people writing these things from? Where is Bob Dylan's? What's his point? What's he saying?
Right.
And you can actually get wow. And that's what I meant when you started to follow lyric writers. Like, his music wasn't technically overly challenging per se from a playing perspective. But when you combine it with what his words were and the melodies, then it's like, wow, that's pretty solid and not easily duplicated.
So after a short period of time, we both, I think, recognized we had some really great vocal talent in the ladies, as well as the lead singers, and they would swap out, and there was no quote center point entertainer in the group. It was truly an ensemble in the way that we approach it, but the vocals really kind of stood out for us. So Steve, you work full time now, obviously still involved with music. You're in North Carolina now. You moved to North Carolina off Long Island, and I'm still holding it against you. But this is not the North Carolina Sound Podcast. This is the Long Island Sound Podcast. But
no, of course.
So where do you see yourself going musically? What have you done in the interim, part time, and what's the future for Steve Martino?
Well, it's interesting. Originally, the plans were coming down here, and of course, this all occurs during COVID. So we moved down here, and everything goes into an immediate state of lockdown. So in coming down here, prior to selecting where we're going to live and everything, we did go to all the little clubs and look around and see musicians playing. And that's one of the things that drew us to this area. There's an awful lot of live music of every type, individuals, full bands, jazz, rock, all that kind of stuff. And that's what I was hoping to do. I was hoping to get, hooked up with a bunch of musicians and start playing some gigs again, play live. that of course fell by the wayside because COVID locked everything down. I remember one night going to just a club shortly after we got here, before everything locked down. We went to a little cocktail bar called Tails, which was short for cocktails. Mm-hmm. And there was a piano player just sitting there playing, and played every song that anybody would come up and say. And I'm like, well, that'd be fun. I could do that, So those are all my goals. With that, of course, comes COVID and everything goes into lockdown. But I have been able to sit and write, and I use the DAW program, or Digital Audio Workstation Logic Pro, and I'm able to just play, come up with a melody, develop it into a song, create it. I'm doing that now. I've got a lot of them in the works that and I'm learning too. The best part of it is I'm enjoying learning, like how to create the song, how to mix it. Of course, then the mastering side of it comes in. It's there's a lot to it that I'm enjoying learning, but I know I'm not good at it. So
that's where we're going to set you up with Mike Nugent, and he'd be happy to help you along the way. So besides that, you play piano and you play drums. So just to let everybody know, because it's funny about these podcasts, they don't stay on Long Island. They hit the internet, and you'd be surprised, people from Europe. So what part of North Carolina are you in, Steve?
So down by the Wilmington area, Leland, North Carolina, it's the Cape Fear region. So it's down on the coast, because we've always loved the coast. It has a very vibrant music scene. It's got a very eclectic mix. The city of Wilmington is very eclectic, and I mean that from it's got university age kids all the way to the retirees, and everybody in between. And it's very eclectic, so it's vibrant, which is one of the reasons we picked this area. That wasn't an easy choice, leaving New York. I mean, that's where I'm born and raised and everything else. But this has been nice. This has been a good.
Well, apparently what I've learned from you today is you are adventurous as far as opening yourself to new possibilities. And that's, hey, look, as we get older, it's usually we tend not to be as adventurous. So kudos to you and Anne-Marie for moving in that direction. And I tell you, I learned a lot today. I mean, we've had a lot of conversations, but I did learn a lot today. Hey, all our subscribers and audience out there in the Wilmington, North Carolina, you'll find a link. Actually, it'll be on Gig Destiny, that if you want to contact Steve and take advantage of his talents, great keyboard, great drummer. No, really, and a great guy. Why not? You never know where it's going to lead. But I tell you one thing, and I end this a lot with my podcast, we can account for what's in our wallets and what we own. What we can never account for is our time. So I appreciate your time with us, and I'm sure our audience appreciates it very much. So thank you, Steve Martino.
Thank you, Steve. I've enjoyed this. This has been a lot of fun, and I'm learning every day. Just to be able to hook this thing up and make it work was a learning experience. But thank you very much.
All right, brother. Be well. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the time you spent with us. Please subscribe and comment, and visit us at gigdestiny.com. Till next time, be generous with your joy, keep your spirits high, and let the music take you on a journey. Be well. Peace. Thanks so much for listening. Please rate, review, and comment on the show. We really love to hear from you. And call our listener line at 631-800-3579. Again, thanks so much. Be well.